Brown here with Carl Jones. This is BKL Nightly on a Wednesday. This is the Let's Talk Ball edition. Normally you'll see this on a Tuesday night, but because of the Thursday schedule, everything's out of whack, so we're jamming this in on a Wednesday. Talking about the Bills and the Jets, and as you might imagine, this is going to be a lot of positive stuff from the Bills' point of view. Carl, let's start on the offense, and the guy who stood out on offense without a doubt was James Cook. And look, we could talk about what happened in this game, but that's going to be pretty much the same conversation we had about James Cook going back into last year. But one thing you want to talk about is how unique Cook works with this offensive line and this scheme, and why it kind of defies your normal expectations.
Yeah, I remember when James Cook got drafted and we started this show, he was a guy that you're like, all right, he's sub 205, 210 or whatever, generous if he's got like weights in his, right, if he got weights around his ankles. And okay, you put him in the passing game, a scat back, get him on the perimeter. And then you watch him and you realize he's not that type of player, but then you're like, he doesn't break tackles, so how good is he between the tackles? And you fast forward 4 years and you realize, man, his skill set that goes along with this offensive line, especially the interior, Saibo, Connor McGovern, and David Edwards, there are maulers in the run game, especially when they got those duo blocks, those inside runs where they get downhill. And James Cook's ability to read and fill off of those blocks and break arm tackles, I'm not going to say he's running through people all the time, although he can do that. His ability to combine that with their strengths is how you get those explosive runs, because the majority of his explosive runs kind of happened right down Broadway. I think of that Patriots game last year was right down, I believe, right between the guard and the tackle. So it's just unique in how a smaller guy is best used on the interior runs like that. And it's just kudos to him for improving as a player and being willing and able to get stronger, improve his contact balance. Because I remember his rookie year, even parts of his sophomore campaign, where you lay a finger on him, he's going to go to the ground.
Contact balance is the word that came to mind. When you talk about strength, it's not really strength with him. It's the ability to not go down so easily. And then when you combine that with the elusiveness that he already had, when he's still on his feet, it's obvious he can still make moves. I mean, this is not like rocket science, but the fact he's gotten to that point is where you've unlocked the ability for him to become an every down back. Because I've talked with Bill Scouts years ago when they drafted him, and I think the idea of James Cook was to be a third down back, to be that, remember they tried to make the trade for, who was the third down back who used to play with Washington that was here and then went back?
J.D. McKissick.
Yeah, exactly. So they wanted that type of guy and thought Cook would fill that role. And coming out of college, that's what you and I thought it would be. That's what he looked like, that kind of guy. I think he surprised everybody with his ability to level up. And it's been a big level up to all these things he's doing, the big games, scoring touchdowns at the goal line 2 years ago. That was not something we thought we'd get from James Cook. This is all about being able to stay on his feet and push forward. And then the other thing you talk about, the runs down Broadway. The Bills do so much outside zone, mid zone. And he has gotten so good at knowing where to go with that. And you saw it in this game because the touchdown run and the play before that are both outside mid-zone plays. And Cook knows exactly, when I see this on the outside, I'm going to cut it back and this is going to be available. In the same game, Breece Hall is running similar style plays, outside zone, mid-zone plays, and not reacting anywhere near as fast as Cook. So his ability to understand the hole, understand where to be, Carl, I think is as much a part of this as it is the improvement in strength and contact balance.
Yeah, James Cook has proved a lot of us wrong. When you think of that third down profile, fast forward 4 years in his career, I don't think he's a running back that the Bills really trust to do a whole lot of that. Most of that has to do with pass protection stuff, because that down is the most important thing is keeping Josh Allen upright. And that's just you either can do that or you can't at this point in your career. So they trust Ty Johnson more so on that role. And then when you think about him on the goal line, he's excellent down there, but it's not because of his ability like he's Jerome Bettis, right, where he's just running through your face. It's more so, like you mentioned, his ability to maneuver and contact balance. And how many touchdowns does he have where he gets hit, but he finagles his body away, where he's just like sliding through and he doesn't really get hit cleanly as a running back. So just really good on him and his blend of combining a really powerful group up front, because they are, especially when they get four hands on you, when they got those combo blocks, they can move just about anybody. And then his ability to fill off of those blocks and find his way into the pay dirt.
It's funny that we talked about his size as being a problem or being a question mark. And one of the things he's done, to your point about being able to squeeze through spaces, he's used being small to his advantage because no one can get small and get skinny like James Cook can. He had a run in this game for 7 or 8 yards where I swear he went through a hole that was not there. He found a way to get between two offensive linemen that were next to each other. That's just being a good, talented running back. And we see that week after week after week with James Cook. Let's talk about another offensive weapon and a guy who has not developed in the same way, certainly not as James Cook has, but not even in the way that I think the Bills would have hoped, and that's Dalton Kincaid. Now, look, we're 2 games in, and this was the big year. So to cast any conclusions, to draw any conclusions on Kincaid, I think is too early. But so far through 2 games, the story with him, Carl, has been pretty much the same as what we've seen the first 2 seasons.
Yeah, I think there's 2 separate conversations to have with Dalton Kincaid. It's the capital that they used to go get him. I believe they traded up to go get him, and thinking of him as a first-round tight end. So those are your Pro Bowl type of players. He's not that. And then when you put him in another bucket, we're like, okay, he can be a serviceable to good receiving tight end. I think he can fill that role. But when I look at him through the lens of a first-round tight end, I don't think that's ever going to really come to fruition. You look at his snap counts through the first 2 weeks, it's 51% and 48%. You can say, oh, well, he only played half of the snaps last week because it was a blowout. Okay, I'll hear that. Well, in week 1, they were passing the entire second half, and he still only played about 50% of the snaps, and that is due in large part because he can't block bigger guys, defensive ends, linebackers. And I know there are a bunch of clips on social media. He had a really good block in that Jets game, I believe on the Ravens game, I believe on the first drive of the game. He had another good block on the perimeter as well last week. The problem is, though, I don't need my tight ends to be menaces on the perimeter. I need them to be really good in terms of blocking defensive ends and linebackers, and he doesn't really excel in that regard. They have a guy in Jackson Halls who is dominant. I remember a block this week against Jermaine Johnson, the Jets defensive end, and he took him for a ride. So I just don't know if he'll ever become that first-round caliber tight end that the Bills envisioned. So he'll be a part-time player for this offense, I would say, and probably slide down the pecking order in terms of the most important weapons for Josh Allen.
2 things about that. Number one, you brought him up, Jackson Hawes. You know, all you need to know about Dalton Kincaid's blocking is that the Bills spent a draft pick on a guy who only blocks. Even though, by the way, Carl, Jackson Hawes yet to play an NFL game without a catch. Blocking tight end, but you can't have a game without him having a catch so far. But regardless, this is why they brought Hawes in, because you have another tight end, Dalton Kincaid, who can't do that. And yeah, now I posted the video of the block against the Ravens. The one this week against the Jets was on the Elijah Moore touchdown, and he took Brandon Stevens for a ride. It was a great block, but those 2 blocks are the exceptions that prove the rule. The reason I'm posting them is because, wow, I never see Dalton Kincaid do that. And even this year, most of the rest of his blocks have been, I think he's been better as a blocker. The bar is low there, but this is not a guy that you can put on the field and depend on as a blocker. When they use him, you know, people talk a lot about 13 personnel and using all 3 tight ends in the game at the same time, and it helps. The funny thing is when they do that, usually Kincaid's on one side and they either run away from him or his job at the snap is to decoy out to the flat. Like, his job on a run play is to get the heck out of the way of said run play. And, you know, you can make an offense work great like that. The Bills probably will. But to your point, you know, this is not what you wanted to get out of a first-round tight end. Now, are there spots, Carl, that you think maybe Kincaid will have an opportunity to level up? In other words, can he be better in the role that he probably will be most used in, which is primarily as a downfield receiver?
For sure. And I mean, it's historically tight ends probably have the longest runway in terms of developing. You think about most tight ends at 2, 3, 4 years in terms of until they become that guy. I think of TJ Hockenson when he got traded from, I believe, the Lions to Minnesota. He didn't become the TJ Hockenson we know today until he got to the Vikings. So yes, he can become a much better receiver, and I think he will. I think there's some more runway for that. Remember, he was a late bloomer to football in general. But in terms of just play strength and being able to block down defensive ends, I don't know if that's ever in his cards. And I don't want to turn this into, I think he's a bad player. I think the Bills have realized, you know what, we're not going to double down on this investment and deliberately make our offense worse by saying, hey, we took a tight end in the first round. He's supposed to play 75% of the snaps. Put him out there and hurt our offense on purpose. Good on the Bills for realizing, you know what, he's a part-time player. We're going to use him in this manner. And that's what he's going to be good at. We're not going to ask him to do something that he's not. So I give credit to Joe Brady and all those involved in coming to that conclusion.
You talk about, being physical with at the line of scrimmage, in line, with linebackers and ends and that kind of thing. You could see that. I want to try and see that from him when routes down the field too. And you actually saw one against the Jets where he did a nice job getting away from a defensive back on a play near the goal line. It wasn't a completion. Josh missed the throw under pressure, but we haven't seen a lot of that yet either. I saw one, and that's something, but more will be needed for Kincaid to kind of get to that point where the Bills hope that maybe he can achieve even in a more limited role. You brought up Joe Brady there, and this was a topic of conversation at Joe Brady's press conference on Monday. The fact that he opened the second half, I think it was, with the same run play 4 times in a row. Let me just double check that. Yeah, first 4 plays of the second half, the exact same up the middle run play. For the record, it went for 7, 8, 5, and then for -5. And I think the reason for that was quite simply that Quinnen Williams had seen the play 4 times in a row. And even that kind of guy, you're not getting it past him for a 4th time. He was like, I had enough of this. We're going to stop this from happening. But what do you make of a guy, and you can take this from any perspective you want, Carl, whether, yourself as a defensive player back in college at Syracuse or, just someone who watches the game, maybe from an offensive point of view. What do you make of a coordinator who's willing to just be like, again, 4 times in a row?
Yeah, I like that. And he gave a good answer about that when he said that you can get away with that before the defense gets to the sideline and start to make adjustments to that. And I think of our playing days when you're getting hit over the head with the same play over and over and over again. On the fly out there defensively, you're trying to figure out, okay, we can do this, we can do that. But until you get to the sideline and you're able to talk about it with your position coaches as well as your DC, you're kind of guessing on what you guys are doing wrong in the process. So I really respect a coach who's not going to make it any more complex as it needs to be. This is working. Let's keep hitting them over the head until they fix it, especially a run play where it's right down Broadway. There's nothing tricky about this. There's no funny business. It's just that I'm stronger than you, and I'm going to move your behind from point A to point B.
One thing about Joe Brady is that I've always thought his best quality is that he, with this offense, understands that I have ridiculous advantages at quarterback and at offensive line. I'm not going to go crazy outside the box. I'm just going to keep pushing those until someone proves they can hang with my team. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 snaps. The one caveat I want to bring up to you before we move on from this is that it was great. It was hilarious. We all loved it. But the last play was a 1st and 10 or a 2nd and 5 run that went for -5. So running that play 4 times in a row got the Bills into 3rd and long. Now you got Josh Allen, Elijah Morgan makes a great play, but that easily could have backfired against them. And I think it proves that there is a point where you can't keep pushing it. Obviously, you're not going to expect -5, but it's still a reminder that, okay, this is fun and all, but it's still the NFL.
Yeah, and I think that you feel that out during the game and in the season, and maybe when you get to December and the postseason, okay, we spam it twice, and that 3rd time we're going to dial it back. So I think this is the time of year, especially you hear coaches say it all the time. September now is more of an extension of the preseason in terms of laying the foundation of the for the season and figuring out what you can and can't get away with. I imagine once we get to October and beyond, we're not going to see inside zone and duo 4 plays in a row anymore.
Probably not. One would think teams would have adjusted by then. A couple more notes with the offensive line I want to get to before we move to defense. I really thought Spencer Brown especially, but Osiris Torrance too, had a great game against Quinnen Williams. Not just that play 4 times in a row. I mean, that play was on 95 most of the time, and they moved him over and over and over for 20 yards before he finally turned around and made a stop. Overall, though, they had a really good day against a really good player. And then last week, we talked quickly about Deion Dawkins kind of be almost alarmingly bad against the Ravens. I don't think he was elite Deion Dawkins in this game, but he was certainly good enough that you can put the concern level last week was 1 out of 10. We're back to 0 now. Deion Dawkins is fine. The Bills' tackles are really, really solid. All right, let's flip to the defensive side of the ball, and we will stay right with the pass rush point of view. Because that 97 dude, Carl, looked like a guy who was maybe 5 years younger. Joey Bosa dominated against the Jets.
I think when they put this plan together of infusing youth into the defensive line, bringing in Joey Bosa and Michael Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi, they wanted to just have a group that was so deep that the whole would be greater than the sum of its parts. And I think there is some merit to that work. And I think of those New England Patriots Super Bowl teams, especially in the latter half of the 2010s, they didn't really have an ace, especially once they got rid of Chandler Jones. Kyle Van Noy was solid and had some other players off the edge, but they didn't have no S-tier player. And now when you look at teams recently, they do have that S-tier S tier player. You think of Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, Nick Bosa, Joey's brother. The list goes on and on. But if the Bills can find a way to get that depth and then have a player who can sometimes dibble and dabble into that S tier type of player, like Joey Bosa did last Sunday, ooh, it is a dangerous place to be. He was phenomenal. He only had 15 pass rushing snaps. He had 6 pressures. He was a menace. I think Justin Fields is still dreaming or having nightmares about 97. A great, great performance. He was dominating against the run and his ability to set the edge, getting after the pass rusher. Getting after the quarterback, excuse me. That is exactly why they brought Joey Bosa to Orchard Park.
You undersold that. I expected a ooh from Carl, and instead of like just a ooh, because the way Bosa played, that was game-changing ability. Look, the numbers are ridiculous. This defensive discussion is going to be kind of weird because the Jets didn't even have 50 plays, and almost half of them were in garbage time anyway. So all the sample sizes are small. But Joey Bosa in this game was on the field for 16 dropbacks. I charted him with 6 pressures. That's 1 pressure every 3 dropbacks. Now, look, everybody's pressure, qualifications, the way I charted is different than PFF, whatever. It don't matter. The dude was in there all day, and he took 2 offensive tackles that we believe are pretty talented and might still be. They didn't look great in this game, but they might still be. He whiffed them both, each, 1 time in this game. So, like you said, my bar for Joey Bosa was just give me Greg Rousseau. If you can give me Greg Rousseau on 2 sides, I feel like it's worth it. Now, we're talking about what the Bills were hoping for from Von Miller back when they handed $50 gazillion to Von Miller a few years ago, and you've seen it from Joey Bosa. Now, we got to be, it's 2 games. He wasn't that great in the Baltimore game, but boy, like you said, if the Bills get this kind of Bosa all year long, what it does for everything else certainly, changes things. Now, Carl, just fill in a little bit here with the caveat about, we talked about this before the show began, about what changes when you look at what this game was from the short sample size point of view.
Yeah, when the game script gets out of hand early, where, hey, defensive linemen know they can go hunt because the Jets are down 14, it puts some more pressure on the offensive line to backpedal every single snap. You hear offensive linemen talk about it all the time. They hate when they have to pass 50, 60 times a game because you are inherently going up against a better athlete and you're going backwards. Just think of that visual for a second there. It is really tough on O linemen. And this game got out of hand in the first quarter. So, of course, it's a little bit more difficult for the Jets offensive tackles to hold and contain Joey Bosa and AJ Epinesa and Greg Rousseau for 60 minutes by that point. And especially with a player like Justin Fields, who already doesn't have great pocket presence. But nonetheless, you still got to go out there and win. He took the ball away twice. He brought down Justin Fields another time. He hustled on that play in the first quarter. It was a phenomenal performance. And to add this point a little bit, Sean McDermott always says you have to earn the right to rush the passer, and you have to get in situations where you can get after the quarterback. These are the situations we are talking about. 3rd and long, when you're up 15, when you're up multiple scores, so you can go there and hunt. It's hard to pin your ears back and go after the quarterback when you are down 14. They're running the ball all game.
And I don't think when Sean McDermott says you have to earn it, you kind of think of a guy like Joey Bosa. Well, that dude's been around. He should not have to earn anything. It's not about earning. It's about proving. When you're doing it, like you said, up 15, yeah, it might have been an obvious rush situation, but like you said, he still did it. You can't take that away. And when you see that 6 times out of 16, well, that's a guy you want to put on the field more often. And Joey Bosa against the run, pretty solid. First play of the game, he's getting push that helps push Breece Hall further to the sideline and cuts down the amount of space he has. So Bosa's doing it, against the run and the pass. Separate of Bosa, I want to point out, AJ Epinesa had 3 pressures the way I chart him, also going around Olu Fashanu. So again, a tackle's a first rounder who's looked good. AJ Epinesa had multiple pieces of success against him. I like Deion Walker's game in this one. And Javon Solomon, the technique isn't superb, but that dude has an energy which got him in the backfield on more than one occasion. And I was surprised when you think about Noah Oliver, what do? The Bills went Javon Solomon a tackle a few times. I didn't think he had that in him as a guy who was a smaller DN to begin with. But Carl, he was in this game, making plays. So all set in the defensive line, or you got anything more there?
Nah, they looked really good. And obviously some investments aren't there yet. 2 guys are suspended. 1 guy is inactive. But through 1 week, after what we saw Sunday, I really like what I've seen out of that group.
Let's talk about the job Bobby Babich did, and I thought this might have been his best game plan ever. Carl, start with the run blitz stuff, because in the first half, it was Matt Milano on the first possession. It was Christian Benford on the end around. It was Trey White in the possession after that. All big negative losses. Talk about how Babich's run blitz game really altered how the Bills were defending the Jets' run game.
Yeah, when you think of blitzes, you think of getting after the quarterback. You think about heating up and speeding up a quarterback, but you can also blitz on rundowns to force negative plays. You mentioned Matt Milano, the 2 cornerback blitzes. I know the broadcasters during real time just thought Christian Benford just shot his shot. That was actually a blitz. You could see Cole Bishop shade over to his side. It was a run blitz, a good calculated call by Bobby Babich, as well as Trey White in the second half. Who knew Trey White can tackle running backs, by the way? Shout out to Trey White for tackling running backs in the open field. Good for him. But in terms of when you run blitz, you change the number count and you get guys in different gaps. If I'm going to bring a corner blitz, that means that defensive end is going to go over to the B gap and you go down the line. You're moving numbers, you're causing disruption. And that's really good in terms of changing the numbers and causing just flat out disruption and chaos for an offensive line. And another reason, and I thought that it was really smart by Bobby Babich, I remember during my playing days, whenever they cut the split, and what I mean by that is when the wide receivers are within, let's say, 5 yards of the tackle, as a corner, depending on the call, you can give a nice little call to that linebacker who may have been blitzing or to that safety. Hey, I'm going to go to cat here, and I'm going to be that guy that blitzes. I don't know if that's what happened here, but when you do that and that corners and that receiver's tighter to the formation, I'm able to add in and get home much quicker. To further add to that point, think of the AFC Championship game, 4th and whatever. Josh Allen throws that crazy pass to Dalton Kincaid. The only reason that worked is because the wide receiver was split to the formation. Trey McDuffie blitz. The same logic applied right there with Christian Benford and Trey White being able to get home and force some TFLs there.
Good stuff right there with explaining how that works and how much of a difference it makes. You remember you went back to the point you made about changing the gaps. This is the Bills are a 1-gap scheme, which means each player's got a gap. That's their job. I defend this space. No one gets past me. And on that Milano blitz on the first play of the game, it did look like he was in, I think, the C gap it was the B gap and came over to the A gap. And on top of the fact that you're attacking quickly instead of waiting for a lineman to come to you, which is traditional run defense, you're also, at the moment the ball is snapped, altering what the offensive lineman responsibilities are. And separate of how the blitzes worked in this run game and, even in the pass game a little bit, we'll talk about that in a minute, there were multiple times where it looked like the Jets had a body to block the person who made the tackle, and that body could not find the tackler, because I think the Bills were doing a good job of changing the gaps and changing the responsibilities. Now, on top of the run blitz stuff, Carl, the other thing that I was very surprised at is that Bobby Babich kept on bringing blitzes late in this game, even when it was kind of out of hand. It was a similar blitz, a similar overload blitz. The Jets never had an answer for it. You talk about Joe Brady running the same play over and over. This wasn't back to back to back. But Bobby Babich pretty much had one blitz button and pressed it 3 or 4 times and was getting free pressure after free pressure after free pressure.
Yeah, Cole Bishop got a sack in this game, I believe.
Exactly.
On Tyrod Taylor. And you can say, oh, they wanted to heat up Justin Fields. Tyrod Taylor may not be a lot of things, but he's a veteran quarterback who has seen a bunch of coverages. So you would think, do I want to heat him up because maybe he can know where things are coming from? No, the Bills didn't care. I wonder how much of an imprint Ryan Nielsen has on this group in terms of bringing pressure, because his history with the Jacksonville Jaguars, I believe the Falcons as well, just blitz packages and being creative. I would love to know that. But yeah, they figured out some creative ways to get to the quarterback as well as stop the run. I want to see how this evolves throughout the year, because this is a copycat league. I mentioned on the offensive side of the ball, it is only September, so the foundation is just being set. But I think after a debacle in week 1, and they tried to blitz in week 1 and it didn't work, I like how they got back to their roots and where they were able to create some explosive plays.
To your point about that, though, when we look at all the things the Bills did right in this game, and we already brought up the small sample size thing, but also, this was one game. And when you talk about the run defense in particular, yeah, Bobby Babich did a great job scheming around it in this game without Ed Oliver, and he's going to have to do it in the next game without Ed Oliver and Matt Milano. It doesn't feel like, to me, this is something you can get away with all the time. There's going to have to be other solutions that the Bills came up with. But Carl, at least in this game, Bobby Babich had the answers and really was a big reason the Bills got this win.
Yes, and to further drive home that point, think of Lamar Jackson last year in the postseason. They blitzed the hell out of him in that game, and they got away with it because the passing game without Zay Flowers wasn't as strong. So you can blitz Lamar Jackson, you can heat him up a little bit, because of the fact that the ball's not going to come out as quick because he's throwing like Tylan Wallace or whoever was out there, a receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. They blitzed a lot in week 1 too, but it didn't work because Zay was out there, D-Hop is out there, Rashad Bateman. So it is a bit of a boomer bust, and I think as we go on, they'll be able to, you would hope, figure out how to pull those strings and press the buttons at the right time instead of just spam blitz, spam blitz, spam blitz every single play.
And to your point about, who the Ravens had personnel-wise between the playoffs and this year, the Jets had a bad game. No matter how you want to slice it up, Justin Fields missed throws. Like I said, it looked like the protections were not very well thought of, orchestrated, whatever you want to say. I mean, he had a couple plays where he just flat out missed throws. The Isaiah Davis one on the sideline end of the first half, that might be a touchdown if you put that on the money. So all the things the Bills did right, it was helped by the Jets having what seemed to be a bad game. Maybe this is who they'll be all year. Who knows? But there were things that were bonuses in terms of this, Bills defensive performance. One more thing to get to, because we can't ever talk about a game without giving Carl some corner time. But Christian Benford had a heck of a play on a 3rd and short throw early in the second half that got the Jets off the field quickly. That deserves a couple minutes here.
Yeah, I broke it down on my XP, but I'll do it again here. So the Bills are in cover 2 on this 3rd down. They got there in a funky way. Greg Rousseau dropped off the ball. But essentially in cover 2, the cornerback has the flat responsibility, basically from 0 to 10 yards down the field. And on paper, the Jets had a good play call. They had Breece Hall on the flat and then that wide receiver down the sideline. So you're basically high-low on the cornerback there. Hey, wherever the cornerback's not, I'm going to go there. Well, Christian Benford did a fabulous job of sinking just enough to take away the receiver on the sideline. And then as soon as Justin Fields took his hand off the grenade, I'm using football terms here, took his hand off the football, he went straight downhill. He threw the ball to Breece Hall and stuck him. Breece Hall is a big boy. I think he's around 220 pounds. Christian Benford stuck him for basically no gain, got off the field on 3rd and 3. Those are the type of plays where you can draw it up all you want, but if your cornerback can't make that tackle, who cares? And there are very few cornerbacks in the National Football League that I trust more than 47 in open space, and that was yet another example out of like 100 that showed why he's in that tier of player.
You talk a lot about things being teach tape. That was ridiculously good teach tape. You can't ask a corner to play cover 2 better because, like you said, I think if he comes down a second sooner, Justin Fields might throw the ball over his head for a big gain. He played that as absolutely perfectly as you can, and then making the tackle. He stuck Breece Hall in a spot where if you give 6 inches there, that might be a first down. So, yeah, it was an incredible play, something that we've seen a lot from 47. But like I said, deserved a couple minutes here because it was elite stuff. Outside of that, when it comes to the secondary, Cole Bishop I thought was okay. There were a couple plays where I thought like he had his eyes in the wrong spot and got moved. So there's still some work to be done there. Did have the sack. Made a tackle on a running back who broke away, which is not a small thing coming after that week 1 game. But, give me 30 seconds on Cole Bishop, where he's at through game 2. I don't know if we want to get in doing this every single time, but at least for today.
Yeah, I thought that it was just above all else as a player, it's a confidence booster. I know the players talked about it. They talk about it all the time in terms of you just want to get your feet wet again, get back on track. There weren't any highlight plays outside of the sack, and that was later on in the game when things were out of hand. But it was just encouraging to see the fact that he isn't completely shattered in confidence and that he can execute the game plan and what's called of him. Obviously, you want to see him progress against better competition and more difficult game plans. And honestly, I don't know if he's going to see that until I think Michael Penix in about a month or so. But
none might not be bad. The Dolphins can do some things.
Yeah, but the way that the Bills play the Dolphins, the safeties are in the park. They're in the parking lot every single play. So like, you're 25 yards off the ball. Just don't get beat over the top. So this may be a chance. And hey, if Achane gets in open space, bring him down in that regard. So that may be where Cole Bishop gets tested a little bit. But once again, he did what he was supposed to do, and above all else, is good enough to get a win against the New York Jets.
All right, that's going to wrap things up for us in this show. Thanks for once again watching and listening to Let's Talk Ball on the BKA Nightly Cycle. We'll be back again on Tuesday next week for a couple weeks, and there's a Monday game, and we mess it all up again. For Carl Jones, I'm Thad Brown. Thanks for watching. We will see you again next week.